morning, everybody. Hello, my name is Ruth. I'm a member of Christ Central Red Hill, and I will be telling the story of the birth of Jesus foretold from the book of Luke, chapter 1, verses 26 to 38. And I will be reading from the NIV Bible. There we go. So, in the sixth month of Elizabeth's pregnancy, God sent the angel Gabriel to Nazareth, a town in Galilee, to a virgin pledged to be married to a man named Joseph, a descendant of David. The virgin's name was Mary. The angel went to her and said, "Greetings, you who are highly favored. The Lord is with you." Mary was greatly troubled at his words and wondered, what kind of greeting is this? What kind of greeting might this be? But the angel said to her, "Do not be afraid, Mary. You have found favor with God. You will conceive and give birth to a son. You are to call him Jesus. He will be great and will be called the Son of the Most High. The Lord will give him the throne of his father David, and he will reign over Jacob's descendants forever. His kingdom will never end." "How will this be?" Mary asked the angel, "since I'm a virgin?" The angel answered, "The Holy Spirit will come on you, and the power of the Most High will overshadow you. So the Holy One to be born will be called the Son of God. Even Elizabeth, your relative, is going to have a child in her old age, and she who was said to be unable to conceive is in her sixth month of pregnancy, for no word from God will ever fail." "I am the Lord's servant," Mary said. "May your word to me be fulfilled." Then the angel left her. What a story. It's a Christmas story you all have probably heard a lot, but it's good to touch on it and maybe key into some nuggets that we could get out of it and apply to our life during this season, and especially in the type of sort of environment we find ourselves in at the moment, especially with the pandemic. So we see a sequencing of events here where an angel, Angel Gabriel to be precise, appears to Mary, but before then he had appeared to Zachariah to inform him that God had heard his prayers and that his wife Elizabeth would have a son. So in response to Zachariah, to the news brought to Zachariah, which was prior to the angel appearing to Mary, we hear that and we see that Zachariah responds to the responds to the information with a question of doubt. He says, "How can this be?" I can imagine emotionally for him, as it would have been for Mary as well. It must have been difficult for him after experiencing years and years of disappointment. He wanted a child, having a son especially was seen as such a cultural importance because you needed someone to carry on your name to the next generation and onward. And he received a news and he was told all of a sudden after years of disappointment that he was going to have a child. And one wouldn't blame him for responding with doubt, to be honest. How many of us would probably take the news lying down? We would probably respond with doubt. And that was the story of Zachariah. But we see following on in this story that the angel appears to Mary, who was a female in a very male-dominated world. She was almost a child in a world that revered age and wisdom. She was a nobody. She didn't have any status. She was from an insignificant town, the village of Nazareth, an utterly insignificant place. And God had not prepared her for the appearance of the angel, but instead he sends the angel to prepare her for a surprise. And we see that unlike Zachariah, when the angel appears to her, Mary, knowing full well knowing full well how difficult, so what difficult the question is, or the information that's being posed to her, responds with a response of trust. So rather than asking the angel, "How can it be?" she responds with trust and saying, "How will it be?" Now I've jumped a bit ahead because before the angel delivers the message to Mary at all, he greets her with a quite a strange greeting. He says, "Rejoice, you favored one." And I can imagine Mary must have been quite perplexed and confused. Um, why would he call me that? Why would he call me favored one? But what I realized is that God signals out and calls out the ordinary people. When God is working in the world and you read through the Bible, it is often through insignificant people. And because we are chosen of God, we too are called favored, and we too are able to do amazing things in this world. I can imagine when the angel came with that greeting and message to her, that she was quite perplexed. And when he told her, the good news, she was confused. Well, how could this be? I don't know, a man. I'm meant to be married to a guy named Joseph, and all of a sudden you're telling me, and I've not even touched him. You're telling me that I'm going to have a child. How could this be? Anyone in their right mind would be confused. For Mary, she understood that it was almost an it was a very difficult ask. It was a lot of faith that God was requiring of her. And, the message was a blessing. It was a blessing in disguise because it was placing her in a difficult position socially, culturally, religiously, personally. She had to trust God's motive. She had to trust that, God's heart was good for her. And she had, at that moment, she had the ability to say yes or no to the angel, because if you actually think about Zechariah's response um, to the angel when he brought the news to him that his wife will have a child, he posed a question, how can this be? And sometimes I wonder, if he wasn't um, made mute, maybe he would have actually, out of probably disappointment, may have just said, you know what, this can't happen, and just write things off. It doesn't mean that we can write off what God has said will happen, but we have the ability to partner with God. We have the ability to say yes to Him, to choose to be a light in the darkness. So, with Mary, she had to trust the motives of God, that He was with her. And in our lives too, we will experience turning points where we may be asked by God. Maybe life will just bring it to us. We may experience invitations to embrace something that is difficult rather than discard it. It might be walking through a season of unemployment. It might be working through a season of just difficulty in relationships. And it is in those moments that, we have a choice. We can embrace that difficulty and trust God's heart for us, or we can just discard it and think that God doesn't love us, or just He doesn't have any good plans for us. You know, um, there is a point, at everything where you need to discern what is happening. And at the basis of that, discern your response and respond accordingly. But I believe Mary, although she knew that she was free to say yes or no, she knew in her heart that God's will for her was good. And the fact that God was inviting her to partner up with Him in this meant that He was going to bring good out of it, regardless of what was going to happen. Mary knew that she could withdraw her yes to God, but she didn't. And it made me think, have we withdrawn our yes to God? Has there been moments in our lives where we've said, yes, Lord, we will do this, we will do that, we will follow you, we will do what you've said. But in light of life's difficulties, in light of, being asked to walk or thread a difficult path, we've withdrawn that yes and thought, well, God isn't good and I'm not going to say yes anymore. I'm going to flip it on the other side. And the beauty about God is that even when we withdraw our yes, He never withdraws His hand from us. His hand is always out there, inviting us to partner up with Him. So that when we say yes and we then say no, and we withdraw our yes, we still have the ability to say yes again because His hands are outstretched to us. And this made me think, this will be a good time for us to think about the times God has asked us to partner up with him. Maybe it's, knocking on that stranger's door, socially distanced, of course, your neighbor's door, and just, wishing them a Merry Christmas, or posting a Christmas card to them, or, writing a letter of encouragement to somebody who is going through a difficult time. What has that question be that God has posed to you or told you to partner up with him in? And you've maybe withdrawn because you thought, oh, that might make me look weird, or actually it's a difficult step to walk, so I'm not going to walk it. Remember, the Father's hand is always stretched out to us. So when I read through Mary's story, and I, prior to that, read through Zachariah's story, I was able to draw some similarities between the two of them. Zachariah's story was like the story of Abraham and Sarah. Both couples were old, beyond childbearing age, and both Zachariah and Sarah doubted. And then I looked at Zachariah's stories and the similarity to Mary, and I thought, Mary and Elizabeth, Zachariah's wives, were the most unlikely candidates for motherhood. Elizabeth was not super old, she was old. And John's birth would have been a miracle. Mary was a virgin, and Jesus's birth would require an even greater miracle. And it just made me think there are always similarities. Even when, you feel like you are called, God is calling you to partner up with him in something that may appear difficult. Trust that God is also preparing on the other side everything you need. Mary was going to walk through she was going to experience something that had never happened before. And, I love how God works, that, he blessed Elizabeth as well, so that they could be in it together. And, tomorrow with the rest of the devotional, or if you read further down, you'll see that Mary went to visit Elizabeth. And, upon Elizabeth hearing Mary's voice, the baby in her womb leaps for joy. And I just love how God will always bring the right partnership as well around us. So what lessons can we learn from this story? From Mary, we learned that, if a news is disconcerting, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad. In a situation where we may receive disconcerting news, a question we should always ask ourselves is, what response would our better self give? So what response would our self who submitted to the will of God give? And I think, in the moments when, especially in light of COVID-19, and, we're hearing that we are in tier 4, it can be so easy for us to lose hope. And I know, especially for myself, it just felt really tiring and draining and exhausting. And in that moment, I had to ask myself, I had to question, Ruth, how should you be responding to this? Is there an opportunity you are missing here? Don't get me wrong, it's hard and it's tough for everybody. But could it be that there could be an opportunity you're missing out here? Could it be that, you could use this as an opportunity to get to know your elderly neighbors, post a Christmas card to them? Think outside the box, Ruth. What can you do? And I guess that's the way I approach disconcerting news these days. And then, there are also lessons for us to learn about the ways of God. God chooses whom he chooses. And that's what I'm learning. The ways of God are not our ways. You would have thought that, in our human mind, if we were to think about how best to save the world, we would not have thought, that Jesus would come in the human form, born through a Virgin Mary. It would not have come to our mind at all. We would have tried to do things our own way. But God chooses whom he chooses. In the preceding story of Zachariah and Elizabeth, Luke tells us of the couple's religious virtue. He was a high priest. But we have none of that with Mary. We don't even know much about Mary's character that would have helped us to understand why God chose her. But what we see in the Bible, especially with the story of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, David, is that God chooses whom he chooses. God told Moses, I will have mercy on whom I have mercy, and I'll have compassion on whom I have compassion. God will choose who he chooses. Mary was not chosen because she deserves favor, but she was favored because she has been chosen. And as Mary would say to in her response, God brings the the powerful from their throne and he lifts up the lowly. And Jesus later said, in God's realm, the last will be the first and the first will be the last. God has chosen us as his people, and he reaches out his hands for more to bring them in. He doesn't choose us because we deserve it. None of us deserve it. But he chooses us because of his love for us and because of his son, Jesus. And just like Mary, because he has chosen us, we are favored. And because of that, if we allow God, he can work in an extraordinary way in our very ordinary lives under tier 4. For us to see the extraordinary ways in which, for us to see the extraordinary in our lives, we need to carry our candles. We need to seek out the tired and the worn in our communities, and we need to allow God to work in an extraordinary way in our ordinary life. As we end this devotional, I would like to take the time to just encourage you to think about the different ways God can use our ordinary lives in an extraordinary way. The way we define extraordinary sometimes is very different from the way God defines extraordinary. And so it's important that we don't use the world's standards to judge how we think God should work through us. As long as we open our hearts and our minds and our hands and we're obedient and willing, God is able to do amazing things through us. And as I said before, it might be posting that Christmas card through your neighbor's postbox. You don't know what hope you might be giving them. So as we end, I would like to take the time to wish you and your family a very Merry Christmas, a Christmas filled with peace and with love and with just the presence of God, and a Christmas that you'll look back on and know that it was an extraordinary year and God still worked in an extraordinary way. So yes, that's me for this morning.